good evening and welcome to the India Development Debate. I'm Tamanna Inamdar and we have an exciting show lined up for you today. Let's quickly tell you what's on the show. Well, first up, we're going to do a deep dive to understand the resilience behind the IT sector. The stocks have become a favorite. The index is on a rise, and it's simply because quarterly results for the first quarter of the top 5 IT majors have shown that they seem to have weathered at least phase 1 of the COVID storm. We're going to do a deep dive and understand what really has gone on and how sustainable this is. So stay tuned for that. We also have a very special exclusive interview lined up with Dr. Soumya Swaminathan. She is, of course, the chief scientist at the World Health Organization, and I'm going to ask her whether she thinks a vaccine for COVID-19 is actually possible in the year 2020. We also have an exclusive interview with Kunal Shah of Cred lined up. So a lot going on there. Do stick on, but let's begin with our first subject that we're tackling today on the India Development Debate, which is the IT sector. Now, at least 4 of the 5 IT majors, and all of them have posted their quarterly 1 results in the last few days, have beaten estimates by quite some margin on how they would fare. The worst was expected in this quarter because the deep impact of COVID was expected to hit them like every other sector, but IT mostly. And there seems to be a positive surprise in saying that things weren't that bad after all. So of course the market has rewarded the sector and its investors, but we need to go deeper and understand what's really going on. Before we do that and introduce you to our panelists, let me go across to my colleague Poonam, who is breaking down the numbers of the top 5 for you. Poonam?
Well, the IT players surprised on the upside in terms of the Q1 performance. In fact, we have seen Infosys as well as HCL Tech resuming the annual guidance. Across the board, we have seen good commentary in terms of the demand. Demand is seen coming back, especially in terms of new age technologies, for instance, cloud, automation, machine learning, extra strong deal wins, a very good cash conversion ratio, and also we are seeing that EBIT margin has in fact expanded for players like Infosys, Wipro, as well as Tech Mahindra. Across the board, Infosys did outperform the tier 1 IT players with a constant currency revenue degrowth of 2% versus TCS, Wipro, HCL Tech and Tech Mahindra posting a revenue degrowth of 6.3 to 7.5%. We're also seeing that Infosys and Wipro and Tech Mahindra margins expanded. TCS and HCL Tech did see a decline in terms of the margins, however it was still a beat in terms of the overall performance. Deal wins have been healthy across the board, $1.74 billion for Infosys and $6.9 billion for TCS. In fact, Infosys has resumed the guidance, saying that they do see 0 to 2% constant currency growth in terms of revenues, and operating margin is seen in the range of 21 to 23%. HCL Tech has guided a QOQ growth of 1.5 to 2.5% in constant currency terms over the next 3 quarters. EBIT margin is seen 19.5 to 20.5%. We're also seeing that BFSI, high-tech, life sciences and healthcare vertical have been resilient versus retail and manufacturing, which did see sharp decline. And America has been fairly resilient versus Europe, but not just the top tier 1 companies, but even the mid-cap IT companies, for instance, Persistent, Cyient, Hexaware, Emphasis did surprise on the upside.
Alright, so that was the story. Thanks for that, Poonam. That was the story on the numbers, and that's just really the starting point for our conversation, because the IT sector, for one, is a very interesting one to track. It is the one sector that has, propelled India into the new economy, has been a crowning glory for us all across the world, and is also deeply impacted by what is happening all around us. Let me go across quickly to R. Chandrasekhar, former president of NASSCOM, joining us on the show this evening. Arvind Thakur, former VC and MD of NIIT Tech, and Sandeep Agarwal, associate director at Edelweiss Financial Services. Welcome to all of you, and a very good evening. Mr. Chandrasekhar, just your take, because in April I think in April or even early May, it seemed complete gloom and doom. That momentum, or at least that narrative, has changed after the quarterly one results have shown that it's not that bad. What do you think is the reason for this change?
Yeah, I think first of all, March, April, when COVID really hit India and the lockdown began, there was not only doom and gloom, there was also a lot of uncertainty. I mean, nobody knew how bad it would be, how long it would be, how much the impact would be. So all of that, I think, added to the sort of atmosphere of doom and gloom. But getting to a more rational thought process, and over 3-4 months, 4 months since then, I think there has been enough experience to actually not only make a rational analysis, but also to see in actual practice what the impact has been. First is there were two levels of the impact that were anticipated. One was in the short term, and the other was in the slightly medium or longer term. And in a sense, this responded to some of the supply side problems in terms of how difficult would it be for the Indian IT industry to continue its business and provide services to the clients without interruption in the face of such a massive problem. And how much it would impact the performance of the companies. And naturally, there was a lot of apprehension. But what the results have shown is that, in fact, the industry, which I think has in the past withstood smaller storms, has also withstood this tsunami much way beyond the expectations that anyone had. But if you go to the next level, the demand side and the medium to longer term, then I think there's a different set of issues. While on the short term and on the supply side, I think the performance of the industry has been extraordinary, the resilience has been absolutely incredible, and the spirit has been completely indomitable. But if you look at the medium and longer term, I think there are some realities which cannot be escaped from, as well as some silver linings and in fact some very good long-term outcomes as well. First and foremost, there are a lot of sectors which have been very badly impacted globally. You take the transportation sector, we all know what's happening. Yes. Aviation, for example. You take the hospitality industry.
Sure. We'll come to this in detail, Mr. Absolutely, Mr. Chandrasekhar. I think you've put it forward very interestingly, and just to break it down, why the story is also one that deserves to be talked about is it highlights the very quick adaptability of the sector. To move that large number of employees and its workforce to efficient work from home model in such a short period of time, to be able to grapple with the increase in demand of digitization across sectors has truly been commendable. And Ivan Thakur, do you think that that's one big key takeaway? Between the big five, you're going to have about 10 lakh people working from home for the foreseeable future. I mean, that changes things on a whole different level.
Absolutely, Tamanna. So, when a crisis of this nature, of this magnitude hits you, recovery actually happens in 3 stages. The first stage is to survive. And if you look at this particular crisis, what we have seen is that there has been complete demand destruction in a few select verticals, and the supply chain in terms of how to execute that got disrupted because people had to just stay at home, and that was really the turning point where the industry actually was able to move its entire workforce from its software factories into the homes where people could execute and service their customers seamlessly. But I must add over here that this actually happened with a lot of support from the government, and I must congratulate industry body NASSCOM for facilitating the dialogue between the industry and the government, because many things have to be done to bring about this change in such a rapid manner. So, for example, the IT services industry got the status of an essential service, which allowed it to move, its machines and other equipment, to the homes. The Department of Telecom actually gave a lot of leeway and provided regulatory approval to be able to, have virtual private network connections from home and so on. So there was a lot of, I would say, support that came facilitated by the industry body, to make this transition. And indeed, that has been one significant factor why the industry has been able to survive this tsunami.
No, that's fantastic. We'll come to the forward-looking part that Mr. Chandrasekhar was talking about, and that's really important. And I'll start on it with Sandeep Agarwal. Were the worries and the concerns overestimated, or is the sort of sustainability being overestimated now? The way the stock market is responding to IT stocks, is it because there are great valuations, or is there a visibility on long-term sustainability in this situation?
So, thanks, and I will just take 2 minutes to answer this thing. So, I was actually shocked when NASDAQ was crashing every day in March and April. I was just not able to make out what is happening, because on one side, media agencies were reporting very high online activity, and on the other sides, the high-tech stocks were falling and NASDAQ was falling. So, I was not able to make out the correlation at all, because to my mind, this was the only sector other than healthcare which should have massively benefited and gone up, but it was moving the reverse way. And then, I am covering these stocks for quite some time, the time stocks for 3-4 years passively, I tracked them. So, I was shocked what you're missing. And then we started doing a lot of channel check and discussion with different people, how many people are doing what and all those things. And I must say, and I agree with both Mr. Thakur and Mr. Chandrasekhar, that this is the most resilient industry, whether you can go back and see during Y2K, you can see during GFC, and now again in this pandemic, the processes, the search, it is like an assembly line, how they execute and everything, and no other industry probably can match it so easily. It has been built over years, and that is the reason, it came back so strongly. And we were very, very positive that if online activity is going, it is a structural change. We just need to see the data. It took a decade for online activity to go to 12-13% in US, and it has just taken 3-4 months to go to 22%. Now some of it will recede back in next after the lockdown opens, but it will not completely recede back. There has to be a lot of money which has to be spent on technology, and people who get scared to spend on technology, they must spend on the future ready, otherwise they will be disrupted.
Absolutely. So the signs are there, but how sustainable is this, Sandeep? How sustainable is this? Do you think that demand will sustain? There are headwinds right now in what's happening in the United States. The visa issue sort of hasn't mattered so much because of localization in the IT sector from even before, all of this storm hit. And COVID-19 in a sense even facilitates, and work from home facilitates, the visa issue being on the back burner. But do you see this as a sustainable trend?
So, I was talking to one very senior consultant a couple of days back in US, and I asked him the same question, and he answered very nicely. He said, Sandeep, you just go and see 3 years back what were the estimates for Amazon and Microsoft and how many times they have been upgraded. So, when a wind or a wave of a structural demand comes, then no one, in fact, even many CEOs today will not be able to comment on that positively or with confidence that we are going to see huge demand. But in my view, we should always observe what is happening. And in my view, per capita spend and tech has actually got accelerated because of the pandemic, and it will further accelerate. The online activity has accelerated, and all these things finally eventually results into more tech spend. And if there is more tech spend, India basically, 80% of the software is coded in India, and almost more than that by Indians. So we don't have any other option but to come to the most efficient market to do the development. So I think there is a golden period for Indian IT again. And I really don't think that it is about sustainability and non-sustainability. I am not talking about 20-25% growth because there is a huge base on which we are sitting. But a low double-digit growth or 9-10% growth for next 4-5 years looks very much possible to me.
Yeah. Very bullish there, Sandeep, on the prospects of these companies and how they will perform. Mr. Chandrasekhar, you were speaking earlier about the medium to long term demand side constraints that will be faced, because after all, a lot of other industries have to survive and thrive as well. And of course, right now everyone needs to quickly digitize, which is where perhaps your deal pipeline will be looking robust and healthy. But again, where is the sustainability?
If you just try to look at the medium to longer term scenario, then there are a few factors that we have to take into account and not be guided by what is happening in the quarter that has just ended, end of June, or that is going on currently as we speak. First and foremost, the prognosis as far as the global economy is concerned has generally been quite, I would say, muted. Mostly there is an expectation of either zero growth or negative growth, and certain economies, in fact, significant negative growth as well. And given that at the end of the day, the IT sector is a services sector and serves many of these different businesses, it cannot but be impacted. So one is the effect of the global economic slowdown and how that will affect business. I already mentioned earlier that certain sectors are obviously hugely affected and the bottom has almost fallen out in terms of demand. But there are also a few golden sectors. Demand has actually gone up. I mean, pharmaceutical, for example, or in digital services and support services, because the compulsions of the COVID situation and the compulsions of the post-COVID situation actually entail a greater reliance on digital technologies, and therefore, from that angle, it can't but be positive. The third is that in the past we have seen that when there is an economic slowdown, companies tend to postpone major technology decisions and say, let's things settle down. But interestingly, this time around, unlike in 2008, what we are hearing and what some of the research has shown is that investment decisions are not actually getting postponed. So that is one major silver lining. The second is that, as I mentioned, this whole long-term movement to digital brings a whole range of services and demands in terms of different technologies that support working remotely, working from home, in solutions in security, solutions in infrastructure, collaborative tools, and so on. So the whole set of things which would receive a boost. And from a cultural point of view, I think trust and reliance on working from home, to which there was a lot of resistance among clients and stakeholders in the past, as well as offshoring, where still a lot of companies, especially mid-tier companies, were still somewhat resistant. All of that has changed dramatically. So we've seen a huge acceleration in the trends which made the whole IT industry happen. So from that point of view, I think it looks extremely positive. So in the immediate aftermath of the COVID and towards this, I would say the third quarter, that is July to August, July to September and October to December, we would actually perhaps see some indications of how significant the demand side constraints are. But hopefully, and that's the general expectation, that in 2021 and fiscal year 2021-22, there would be a significant upsurge in demand as a cumulative impact of all of these factors. So net, the bottom line is that while there might be
on a relative basis, Yeah, on you need to look at it relatively as well. And Sandeep earlier made a good point that IT sector is going to be in demand hugely as compared to say others, and maybe that's where some of the enthusiasm from investors is coming in. But Arvind Thakur, I want to delve a little deeper into the work from home phenomenon. And of course, we've seen all the numbers out there. It's you've talked about how quickly the whole turnaround and transition happened. But have you given thought on what the impact of this is going to be, how it's going to impact culture within IT companies, where a lot of ideation came on these campuses. Is the whole experience going to change, and the core and soul of these IT majors, it will be difficult to sustain that?
Well, I think one of the things that gets impacted when the entire workforce is at home is the interaction, that you have, and you kind of lose out on the social capital. So you need to balance that, to some extent, because, people and, the workforce is made of people, and people are emotional and social beings. So to that extent, while at the moment, you have this almost entire, 95, 97% of the workforce at home, I think the ratio would need to come down a bit. But talk a little bit about, even the demand. I think it's a well-known fact that what CEOs and CXOs were not able to do in their organizations in terms of accelerating the pace of digital transformation, COVID has facilitated that process. And so, as I think Sandeep has very rightly pointed out, this crisis presents a huge opportunity for the technology sector in India, because every organization will need to expand its digital footprint. And so the way I see it is, recovery from the crisis will happen in 3 stages. First stage is survival. I think Q1 results show that the industry has survived, because even though revenues have come down, profitability has been sustained and maintained for the industry. The next step is to revive, and revival will happen by looking at the opportunities and where you need to pivot your business. As Mr. Chandrasekhar pointed out, there are some industry segments which will benefit. There are some industry segments which are challenged, and so organizations will need to see how to pivot from one to the other. And that will be the revival stage. And then the thrive will happen when you sustain that growth. And the opportunity in the crisis is to build rock solid relationships, with your customers and your stakeholders, so that when you come out of this crisis, you're able to thrive on the basis of those relationships.
Do you think, very quickly, Arvind, do you think that hiring levels will also come back? You talked about profitability and margins improving, a lot of that is because costs have been cut, right? A lot of people working from home, a tight hold on hirings, etc. Do you think that will also revive pretty soon?
Well, interestingly, you would have seen that the industry has been very compassionate and empathetic, and has not really resorted to, let's say, things like layoffs on a large scale. I read somewhere that, the top firms have reduced their hiring by about 10,000 people. But if you really look at it, 10,000 on a base of 10 lakhs is just 1%. And that's natural attrition. Whereas revenues have declined 5 to 7%. So the real improvement in cost structures have happened as a result of a reduction in variable pay. People are not going to get their bonuses. Travel expenses. Travel is one of the top 3 expenses of any IT services company. So, with everything stopped, that's a huge expense, which is saved.
Yeah.
And of course, you talked about lowering of overheads because of working from home. So, all these are, I think, factors which have contributed to the improved profitability of the industry.
Well, let's hope it also leads to more hiring in the next quarters to come.
I think so.
Once will give reason to cheer for all of those job aspirants out there.
Correct. So once the revenues come back, hiring will also come back.
Absolutely. All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us in the first big discussion this evening on the India Development Debate. That exclusive interview with the World Health Organization Chief Scientist up next. I last had the opportunity to speak with Dr. Soumya Swaminathan in early March.